This is not just the story of a tower, it is the story of a world with one language and one mouth. It is the story of unity that looked like peace, and pride that felt like progress. It is the story of human beings who did not want to be scattered, and a God who refused to let them become their own salvation. It is the story of the birth of nations, and the birth of languages, and the moment a single human voice fractured into 1,000 tongues. Genesis says the whole world had one language and a common speech, one set of words, one rhythm of thought, one way to name the sky. Imagine what that felt like. No translators, no misunderstandings, no accents marking outsiders. Every marketplace sounded the same. Every lullaby used the same syllables. Every story traveled without losing meaning. After the flood, humanity multiplied. Families became tribes, tribes became clans, and clans became a moving sea of people searching for ground to claim. Genesis says, as people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there, a flat land, a wide horizon, a place where you could see far and be seen by everyone. Shinar was the kind of place that made ambition feel possible. No mountains to humble you, no cliffs to stop you, just open space begging to be shaped. And in that open space, a new dream began to grow. Not a dream of worship, a dream of permanence, a dream of control, a dream that said, "We will not move again." Because deep in the human heart, even after a flood, fear still whispers. Fear of being vulnerable, fear of being small, fear of being forgotten by history. So the people spoke to each other with the language they all shared. And their first words were not prayers. Their first words were a command to themselves. "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone, and tar for mortar. It sounds like a construction detail, but it is a spiritual detail. Because brick is manufactured. Brick is human-made strength. Brick is what you choose when you want a world that depends on your hands. And tar is what you use when you want something sealed, something permanent, something that will not leak. They were not just building buildings. They were building an idea, a civilization where humanity would be the foundation. So they said it again. "Come, let us build ourselves a city." A city, not a tent, not a journey. A city that would tell the world, "We are here to stay." And then they added the centerpiece, a tower that reaches to the heavens. Not because God lives at the top of a tall building, but because the human heart loves vertical symbols. Height looks like power. Height looks like safety. Height looks like superiority. And then they revealed the real motive, so that we may make a name for ourselves. A name, not God's name, our name. Because Babel is not mainly about architecture. Babel is about identity. It is about the human need to be enough without God. And then came the fear underneath the pride. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. Scattered. To them, scattering sounded like losing control, losing unity, losing the ability to keep the story in one place. So they chose the city, they chose the tower, they chose one voice, and they began to stack bricks like prayers to themselves. Row after row, layer after layer, a monument rising from fear, a staircase built from pride. And the higher it climbed, the more humanity believed that they could secure the future with their own hands. But there is one sentence in Genesis that changes everything. It says, "The Lord came down to see the city, and the tower the people were building came down." Because no matter how high human pride builds, God is still above it. And Babel's true crisis was about to begin. Below, the bricks kept rising. The work did not stop at sunrise. It did not stop when the heat turned the air into fire. It did not stop when hands split and bled. Because pain feels bearable when you believe you are building immortality. Day after day, the city widened. Street by street, walls appeared where there had been only flat earth, and in the center, the tower climbed like a human spine trying to stand taller than God. They kept saying the same two words that sound harmless. Come, let us. Come, let us make bricks. Come, let us build a city. Come, let us raise a tower. Come, let us make a name. Come, let us not be scattered. That phrase is the heartbeat of Babel. It is humanity forming a new religion, where the altar is progress, and the God is control. Because the fear underneath the tower was not weakness, it was obedience. God had told humanity from the beginning to fill the earth. After the flood, God repeated it to Noah's family. Be fruitful, increase, fill the earth. But the builders of Shinar said the opposite with their tower. They said, we will stay. They said, we will gather. They said, we will concentrate our strength in one place. They said, we will not let God write our map. And Scripture says, the Lord came down to see the city and the tower. That sentence is not telling you God needed a closer look. It is telling you the tower was never as high as the builders thought. Human pride always feels taller from the inside. From the ground, it looks like heaven is within reach. From heaven, it looks like ants stacking bricks. And then God spoke. Not to the crowd, not to the masons, not to the foreman shouting orders from scaffolding. He spoke as judge and a protector. He said, if as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. That sounds like praise. But it is not praise. It is diagnosis. It is God naming what happens when unity is separated from humility. When human beings unite without God, they do not become free. They become dangerous, because the problem at Babel was not engineering. The problem was the human heart with unlimited agreement. A single language can become a single idol. A single purpose can become a single rebellion. So God said the words that mirror the builders' words. They said, come, let us. God said, come, let us go down. They said, let us build. God said, let us confuse. They wanted one voice. God would break the voice to save the people. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other. And the judgment did not come as fire from the sky. It came as a syllable. It came as a sentence that suddenly sounded wrong. It came as a word that used to mean brick, now meaning nothing at all. Imagine the first moment it happened. A foreman shouts an order from the scaffolding. A worker nods like he understands. Then he turns and freezes. Because the words fell into his ears like stones. He heard sound, but he did not hear meaning. He opens his mouth to ask a question, and the question comes out in a tongue he has never learned. His friend stares at him as if he has become a stranger. Another man laughs nervously, thinking it is a joke. Then he answers, and no one understands him either. The laughter dies quickly, because confusion is funny for 5 seconds, and terrifying for the rest of your life. Voices begin to rise around the tower, not in worship, in frustration, in panic, in accusation. Men who worked side by side now look at each other like enemies, because when language breaks, trust breaks with it. A man points at a stack of bricks. He tries to say, "Bring that here," but his mouth betrays him. The other man hears an insult. He hears threat. He hears mockery. And suddenly the tower is no longer a project. It is a battlefield of misunderstanding. And the greatest weapon is not a sword. It is a word that cannot be shared. The builders try to keep going. They try hand signals. They try drawings in the dust. They try shouting louder, as if volume can replace meaning. But Babel's sin is collapsing under Babel's punishment, because the tower needed one language to keep its rhythm. And now the rhythm is gone. The mortar dries while men argue. The scaffolding stands still while leaders fight to be understood. The city that was built to prevent scattering is suddenly filled with separation. The Lord did not crush the tower with lightning. He crushed it with distance. Distance between minds. Distance between hearts. Distance between people who used to say the same prayers to themselves. And then Genesis says the result in one cold sentence. So the Lord scattered them from there, over all the earth. The thing they feared became the thing that happened, not because God was petty, because God was faithful to His purpose for humanity to fill the earth. And the city they built to make a name became a name that meant confusion. Therefore it is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. Confused, mixed, stirred together until no one could pretend it was still one voice. And in that moment, the first civilization shattered into families again. People began to search the crowd for the sound that matched their own mouth. They turned their heads toward familiar syllables. They gathered with those they could understand, and the tower's shadow fell across a city that could no longer be a home. The city did not collapse with an earthquake. It collapsed with a conversation that could not continue. And Genesis says they stopped building the city, not because they ran out of bricks, not because they ran out of tar, but because they ran out of shared meaning. The tower stood half-finished, a spine without a head, a monument to ambition that could not reach its own goal. Scaffolding creaked in the wind, ropes swayed, fresh mortar cracked under the sun. And on the ground, men who used to be one people began to separate into groups, not by hatred at first, but by necessity. Because when you cannot understand someone, you cannot coordinate with them, and when you cannot coordinate, you cannot stay. So families listened for familiar sounds. They searched for the syllables that still felt like home. They gathered in circles where words made sense again, and those circles hardened into clans. Clans became tribes, tribes became peoples, and peoples became nations. Genesis 10 says this is how the descendants of Noah spread out. It repeats the phrase like a drumbeat of history. By their clans, in their nations, in their territories, each with its own language. The Tower of Babel was not the birth of human diversity from nothing. It was the moment God forced diversity to do what unity refused to do, to fill the earth, to spread life outward instead of stacking power upward. And for the people leaving Shinar, that scattering did not feel like destiny. It felt like exile, because Shinar had become their one center, their one plan, their one name-making machine. And now the center was broken. Imagine the first morning after the confusion. A father wakes up and hears the city differently. The market sounds like a storm of strange tongues. Neighbors shout, but his mind cannot attach meaning to the sound. His child points at a worker and asks a question, and the worker answers in a language that makes the child flinch. Fear spreads faster than news, because the unknown always feels like a threat. Then come the arguments. Then come the accusations. Then come the rumors that this group is plotting. That group is mocking. That group is stealing supplies. And Babel becomes exactly what pride always becomes, a place where people cannot live together because they tried to live without God. So the families pack what they can carry: tools, jars, seed for planting, a few bricks, as if taking a piece of the old dream might protect the new life. And then they begin to walk. Not all in the same direction, not under one banner, but outward, away from the unfinished tower, away from the city of one name. Genesis 10:32 says, "From these the nations spread out over the earth after the flood." That line sounds calm, but living it would have been violent. Because spreading means leaving graves. Spreading means losing the familiarity of one place. Spreading means walking into lands you do not control. And many of them did not want that. They wanted a tower to keep them safe. God gave them roads instead. Imagine a mother on the edge of the city looking back one last time. She sees the tower's silhouette against the sky. She remembers the days when everyone spoke like her, when everyone laughed at the same jokes, when everyone sang the same songs, and she realizes something terrifying. The world will never sound like that again. Her children will grow up hearing other tongues as normal. Her grandchildren will not remember a time when speech was one, and even the name of the city will change. Babel, a name that will carry the memory of confusion into every generation. But here is the hidden thing inside the scattering. God's judgment was also God's restraint, because Babel was humanity trying to unite around self. And history proves what happens when humans unite around self. The strong crush the weak. The tower becomes an empire, and the empire demands worship. So God broke the tower before it could become a global prison. He scattered them before one city could swallow the earth. He turned one language into many languages, so that no single human throne could easily control every human heart. And in the dust of their departure, something else was born. Borders, cultures, songs that sounded different, stories that carried different metaphors, names for God spoken with different syllables, different foods, different art, different ways of counting days. Humanity became a mosaic, not because God lost control, but because God refused to let control become humanity's God. And still, the ache remained. Because even as they scattered, they carried one shared wound. The desire to make a name, the fear of being small, the hunger to build something that reaches heaven without needing heaven. So the nations were born. But the spirit of Babel did not die with the tower. It simply learned to speak in many tongues. Babel was built to make a name. And the tragedy is that it worked for a moment. The tower made them feel important. The city made them feel permanent. The crowd made them feel protected. But all of it was held together by one fragile thing: a shared language, a shared illusion. And when God touched the language, the illusion shattered. Because Babel is what happens when humans try to solve fear with structure. It is what happens when humans try to cure smallness with height. It is what happens when humans try to replace God with agreement. And if that sounds ancient, it is not. Because the spirit of Babel still speaks today. It says, "Come, let us build." It says, "Come, let us control." It says, "Come, let us be untouchable. It says, come, let us make a name. And it always adds the same fear underneath. Otherwise, we will be scattered. Otherwise, we will be alone. Otherwise, we will be vulnerable. Otherwise, we will not matter. So we build our own towers. Some people build towers of success. Some build towers of reputation. Some build towers of perfection. Some build towers of wealth. Some build towers of constant noise, so they never have to hear their own emptiness. And just like Babel, the tower feels like safety, until God shows how fragile it is, because God does not hate cities. God hates what pride does inside them. God does not fear human unity. God fears what human unity becomes when it is united against Him. So Babel becomes a warning written into human history. Not because God enjoys scattering, but because God refuses to let one human dream become a global prison. And here is the turning point that many people miss. Genesis does not end with the scattering. It pivots immediately into a new beginning. Not a tower, a family. Not a city built upward. A promise spoken downward into one human life. Genesis 11 introduces a man named Abram from the family line of Terah. It names places like Ur of the Chaldeans and Haran. It shows a family already moving, already restless, already searching for land. And then Genesis 12 opens with words that sound like the opposite of Babel. The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you." Go, leave, walk into the unknown. Babel said, "Stay here so you won't be scattered." God said, "Go, even if it feels like scattering." Babel said, "Build a city to secure your future." God said, "Trust me with your future." Babel said, "Make a name for yourselves." God said something stunning. "I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing." Do you hear the reversal? At Babel, humans tried to manufacture a name, with brick, with tar, with height, with collective power. But in Genesis 12, God gives a name as a gift, not to a crowd, to one man, not through human strength, through faith, and He adds the purpose that Babel never had. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Babel wanted a name that would pull people inward. God promised a name that would push blessing outward. Babel wanted to climb to heaven. God chose to bring heaven's plan through a wandering family. Babel tried to unify humanity by force of sameness. God would unify humanity by covenant and blessing, not by removing nations, but by redeeming them. And that means the story of Babel is not only about judgment, it is also the setup for rescue, because the scattering created the nations, and the call of Abram created the promise that one day those nations could be blessed. So Babel is not the end of humanity's story. It is the point where God says, "You will not save yourselves by building up." And then He says, "I will save you by calling you out." And maybe that is the mirror for us. Because the question is not only, what tower are you building? The deeper question is, what voice are you obeying? The voice that says, "Make your own name." Or the voice that says, "Follow me, and I will make you a blessing." Babel became a name that meant confusion, not because the bricks were evil, but because the motive was. "Let us make a name for ourselves," they said. And the name they received was the opposite of what they wanted. A name that would forever remind the world what happens when humans try to unify without humility. Now imagine the days after the scattering began. The tower still stood there. half-finished, silent, a giant shape that had once promised safety. But now the shadow of the tower did not feel like protection. It felt like accusation, because every brick was a memory of what they tried to be, and every crack in the mortar was a memory of what they could not control. Families began to leave in waves, not because they wanted adventure, because they could not stay together. And the hardest part of leaving was not the road, it was the goodbye. A brother stands with his brother. They have the same face. They carry the same childhood memories. But now, they do not carry the same words. One of them speaks. The other hears only noise. And for the first time, blood does not guarantee understanding. A wife looks at her husband. She knows his habits. She knows the way he breathes when he is afraid. But when he tries to reassure her, his comfort arrives in a language she cannot hold. So she clutches her children. And she follows the voice that still makes sense. That is how nations begin. Not only with maps, with ruptures, with people gathering around the sound of familiarity, with the birth of us and them. And the tower, the thing meant to prevent scattering, becomes the monument of scattering. Genesis says, "From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth." From there, meaning Babel became a point of origin, a spiritual address, a birthplace of division, but also a birthplace of mission. Because right after Babel, God does something that feels small compared to a tower. He speaks to one man, Abram, and he promises not a tower that reaches heaven, but a blessing that reaches the earth. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you, God says. In other words, Babel scattered the families of the earth, and God's covenant plan would one day touch the families of the earth, not by forcing them back into one empire, but by turning the scattered world into a blessed world. This is where the story becomes a mirror, because most people do not build towers out of pride first. They build towers out of fear. Fear of being irrelevant, fear of being exposed, fear of being scattered emotionally, fear of losing control of the story. So we say our own modern version of Babel's line, "Let me make a name for myself. Let me prove I matter. Let me build something so high that no one can ignore me. Let me create security out of performance. Let me seal the cracks with tar. Let me keep everyone close enough that I never have to face loneliness." And the tower grows. A career tower, a reputation tower, a control tower in relationships, a perfection tower that never lets you rest, a religious tower that looks holy but is powered by anxiety. And the scariest thing about towers is that they can work for a while. They can bring applause. They can bring money. They can bring influence. They can even bring unity around a shared goal. But towers always ask for more bricks, more hours, more sacrifice, more compromise. And eventually, towers bring the same curse Babel brought: misunderstanding. Because pride makes people hear each other through suspicion, and fear makes people speak to each other with sharpness. So homes become Babels. Friendships become Babels. Churches become Babels. Teams become Babels. Not because language changes, but because love disappears. And then God does what He did in Genesis. He comes down, not to humiliate, to interrupt, to stop a tower that is turning your soul into a prison. Sometimes He interrupts with failure. Sometimes with a closed door. Sometimes with an unexpected loss that exposes what you were worshiping. Sometimes with a conversation that breaks because you cannot control another human heart. And in that interruption, you feel scattered. You feel like the thing you feared has finally happened. But what if the scattering is mercy? What if God is saving you from a tower that would have cost you your humanity? What if God is making room in your life for a different kind of name? Not a name you manufacture, a name you receive. Because in Genesis 12, God does not say, build. He says, go. He does not say, make your name great. He says, I will make your name great. He does not say, gather everyone into your city. He says, be a blessing to all peoples. So the question becomes personal. What are you building because you are afraid to be scattered? And what would it look like to trust God enough to walk away from Babel? Babel ends with people unable to understand one another's speech. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, God said. And the result was a world full of sound, but starving for understanding. A world where the same sentence could become a weapon, depending on who hears it. A world where separation feels normal. And if that feels like the human condition, it is. Because Babel is not only behind us, Babel is inside us. It is the place in the heart that says, if I can just build high enough, I will finally be safe. It is the place in the heart that says, if I can just be known enough, I will finally matter. It is the place in the heart that says, if I can just keep everyone close, I will never feel scattered. But Babel always breaks. Sometimes it breaks suddenly. Sometimes it breaks slowly. Sometimes it breaks in a conversation that used to be easy. Sometimes it breaks in a home where two people share a roof, but not a language of love. Sometimes it breaks in a mind that cannot rest, because it is still stacking bricks. And when Babel breaks, shame rushes in. Because shame is what you feel when your tower collapses, and you realize you were standing on it. So you hide. You manage appearances. You build smaller towers to replace the big one. And the world teaches you to call it strength. But in Genesis, God does something different. He does not merely scatter. He also calls. Because right after the story of the tower, the Bible introduces the story of a man. Not a builder, a listener. Not a man trying to reach heaven. A man being summoned by heaven. Genesis 12:1 says, the Lord said to Abram, go from your country, your people and your father's household, to the land I will show you. Go. Leave. Step away from the false safety of what you can control. Walk into a future you cannot manufacture. That command is terrifying, because it sounds like scattering, and Babel trained the human heart to fear scattering. But God's scattering is never the same as human abandonment. God can call you out without leaving you alone. He can remove you from a tower and still carry you into a promise. And then God says something that answers Babel's hunger directly. Babel said, let us make a name for ourselves. God says, I will make your name great. God says, I will bless you. God says, you will be a blessing. And then he widens the horizon beyond one family. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you. That is the antidote to Babel. Not one city forcing unity, but one promise releasing blessing. Not one language used for pride, but many peoples touched by grace. Not a tower that reaches heaven by human effort, but a covenant that brings heaven's plan into the earth. And maybe this is the moment where the story becomes personal. Because the real question is not, would you have built the tower? Most people already are. The real question is, what is God asking you to leave? What city have you made your identity? What tower have you made your safety? What name have you been chasing as proof that you are enough? Because God's call to Abram was not a call to poverty. It was a call to trust. It was a call away from manufactured meaning and toward given meaning. And that is why the call begins with go. Because you cannot receive a promise while you are gripping your tower with both hands. You cannot follow a voice while you are worshiping control. You cannot be led if you refuse to move. So if you are living in the rubble of Babel, hear this. God is not only the one who interrupts pride, He is also the one who speaks purpose into scattered people. He is the one who can take what feels like confusion and turn it into direction. He is the one who can take a broken name and give you a new one. Not because you earned it, because He promised it. And the strongest spiritual sentence a person can say is simple. Here I am, even if I feel scattered. Here I am, even if my life does not sound like the life I planned. Here I am, even if I have been building for years and I am tired. Here I am, because your voice is greater than my tower. And if today you hear that voice calling you out of your shinar, out of your bricks, out of your fear, do not run away. Just answer. Because grace does not begin with a building. Grace begins with a call. And if you know someone living inside their own Babel, someone exhausted from making a name, share this story with them. And if you want more cinematic Bible stories that reveal light behind the shadows, subscribe to the channel. Because the God who scattered the tower is the God who still gathers hearts.